My guests this week are Police Chief Jarrod Burguan and former Police Chief Jim Bueermann. Chief Burguan has led the San Bernardino Police Department since 1992, and Jim Bueermann is the president of the Police Foundation and served as Redlands Chief of Police from 1998 to 2011. Both Jim and Jarrod are also graduates of the University of Redlands, and it's a pleasure to have them on the program. Welcome, both of you, to Inside the Studio.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Thanks.
Chief Burguan, given all of the recent terrorist events, what kind of training did your officers receive in order to be prepared for the shooting at the Inland Regional Center on December 2nd?
I think there's probably two components to that question. One is every police officer in the state of California at least, receives quite a bit of training. There's academy training, there's FTO training, and there's consistent in-service training that officers are required to receive every year, every couple of years. In addition to that, our department, we're a fairly busy place, and so the second component of that is just simply experience, kind of gets you there. And when you work in a busy environment, you kind of learn to work under stressful circumstances. And then in addition to that, we've done a number of active shooter scenario trainings where everybody in the region trains, and really everybody in law enforcement trains the same way, so that when these types of events happen, and they're not common events by any means, but when these types of things do happen, when police officers arrive, everybody kind of knows generally what their role needs to be to take care of business.
What have you learned from the attack, and has your department changed any policies, practices, or training exercises as a result?
I don't see that we're going to change any training exercises. Even though we're a busy place, something like this still serves as a wake-up call. Even though guys are out on the streets and they deal with violent crime issues and they deal with the worst of society all the time, it still kind of triggers something in them to kind of hit that reset button, think about their safety, think about their tactics, think about their equipment. This has caused a few folks to want to upgrade their equipment to be prepared for heavy rifle fire type incidents and things like that. So that has happened. From a training standpoint, I think we're pretty comfortable. We'll come out of this with some lessons learned, and we'll probably make some tweaks to our training. But even within that active shooter training that I talked about a moment ago, we've modified the way that we do that training over the years. That was a byproduct of the Columbine incident that happened many, many years ago in Colorado. And law enforcement started training differently on how we do active shooter stuff. But even that active shooter training has evolved into a different byproduct today than it was 10 or 15 years ago when that started.
So let's go back for a second. Our audience should know that both of you were leading local city police departments before and after 9/11. Have either of you seen nationwide policing practices change since then? If so, how?
I think the biggest change is that we realize that when people think of terrorism and they think of that type of incident happening on U.S. soil, or when they think of terrorism in general, they think of a military type event or something that's going to require a military response. The reality is when it happens on U.S. soil, it's going to be a local police response. And as a result of that, I think law enforcement has shifted its mindset since 9/11 to prepare for these types of things in a different way. It has changed some of the equipment that we carry. It has changed some of the tactics that we use. But I think as you saw on December 2nd, local response is fairly capable of handling most of these types of incidences.
I think literally up to the day before 9/11, on a national perspective, policing was focused on community-oriented policing, community engagement, and problem solving. And I don't think that, except maybe in the largest urban centers, was there really a great emphasis on the local role in a terrorist event. 9/11, the next day, literally changed all of that. I was in D.C. 2 days before 9/11 in a meeting with the director of the COPS office, which is the national entity that pushes community policing in this country, and back in D.C. with him and several other chiefs a couple of months later, where the discussion was entirely different from the discussion we were having just prior to that. And in many regards, I think the second discussion was about what is the role that community policing plays in protecting the homeland. So I think there was great awareness that community policing is really a homeland security strategy, in the sense that community engagement is about reaching out to people in a variety of communities and making sure that they have trust and confidence in the police, because it is from those diverse communities that somebody will probably have an inkling that something is up, and they will call the police or not based on their sense of trust and confidence in the police.
Going right off of that, the December 2nd attack obviously really shook the community to the core. How do police communities, let's say like San Bernardino or Redlands, how do they come together and restore some sense of security and normalcy?
I think the message that we send to folks in terms of our competence, in terms of our calmness, goes a long way. I think what the words that we use, and us being out in the public and talking to our community members, talking on radio stations such as this, meeting in community forums, I think goes a long way. A lot of that fear comes from a misunderstanding of what happened. And what happened on December 2nd was a very, very scary thing. But I also think that we have to teach people and we have to educate people that we have a new norm in this country. We really do. You have to live your life. You've got to have a good quality of life. You've got to enjoy your life, but you've got to use some common sense and you've got to be vigilant. And the best way that we can defeat or stop these types of things from even happening in the first place is, as Jim said, it's a matter of respect, it's a matter of communication, it's a matter of having open dialogue and having folks come forward and willing to tell us about the things that kind of worry them.
I think one of the things so I've heard many, many comments, both in Washington and back here in the Inland Empire, from people who were very impressed with the chief's calm nature and his actions and behavior during the press briefings and anytime the cameras were really turned on him. And I think that we can't understate the importance of, when an incident like this occurs, for the police chief or the sheriff, depending on the jurisdiction, to do exactly what Jarrod did, is to come out and tell people, this is what we know, this is what we don't know, and we'll come back to you on a regular basis and continue to try to update you on what's going on, because that instills a sense of confidence that the police are in charge, that they know what's going on, and that they're going to keep everybody as safe as possible. And I really believe that his actions, he's not going to tell you this because he's a kind of a humble guy, but I will tell you this, that his actions really were textbook in terms of what a police chief should do as fast as possible, coming out and saying as much as you possibly can in a way that causes people to say, this was tragic, this was terrible, but the police are in charge and we'll be okay because they're in charge. And that sense of trust and confidence, I think, went right through the roof during that period of time. And he and his whole department are to be applauded for the way that they discussed what happened and explained what they were going to do and where the investigation was going.
Absolutely, and we second that. From everybody at the university and the radio station, we want to thank you for keeping us safe.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
So recently, in light of other mass shootings in the country, President Obama has issued a series of executive orders to deal with this growing issue. How do either of you respond to this?
Well, I think that the president is trying to do the best he can to deal with the spate of mass shootings we've had in this country. I mean, I think regardless of where one sits on the Second Amendment issue, the level of gun violence in this country is something that we have to deal with. This is a highly political, highly sensitive issue. He's doing what he can through executive action because of the relationship that exists between the administration and Congress right now, and there's probably not going to be any meaningful legislation around fixing the system as it currently exists. So I think that he's doing what he thinks he can do. I don't think that the steps that were taken would have affected this incident. What I know about it from the public sources is that these guns were acquired in a way that wasn't necessarily legal, but is also not necessarily going to get picked up by any of these executive actions. But I think he's doing what he thinks he can do to try to reduce gun violence in this country. Whether those will have any impact, I think time will tell.
And I would echo what Jim said as well. When I listened to the president's speech and when he outlined his executive orders on gun control, in California, we have background checks. We have a lot of those things that are already in place in this state. And stepping away from the December 2nd incident, one of the things that I really look forward to, based upon what he said, is addressing some mental illness issues and getting more resource towards dealing with mental illness issues. This incident wasn't necessarily a mental illness issue. This was a radicalized, ideological, motivated incident. But so much of what we see in the policing world is centered around mental illness issues, and helping us in that arena would be tremendously beneficial, I think.
Now, Jim, you're the president of the Police Foundation, which works to improve nationwide policing practices. How has your organization attempted to address these issues or these incidents?
So we are a research organization, and as such, we take kind of a academic or research slant to all these things. We are interested in the lessons that can be learned from any of these kinds of incidents. So we've done critical incident reviews on not incidents exactly like this, because there are very few, fortunately, in this country of incidents like this, but we look at things like when the former LAPD officer Christopher Dorner began hunting members of the LAPD and their family members, and ultimately killed some of them and killed a couple police officers, and was killed up in the mountains here, took his own life up here in the San Bernardino County mountains. We look at those kinds of incidents and say, what went right, what could have gone better, what are the lessons that the other police agencies across the United States can learn from. And so we will look at things like this, produce a report, and again, try to come at it from more almost an academic perspective. It's not really academic, I guess, in nature, but from a research perspective, what are the lessons that we can learn so that other agencies that may be confronted with something like this can replicate the successes that the other agencies had.
Chief Burguan, Chief Bueermann, thank you so much for joining us inside the studio today.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure.